Here with Billy Briscoe. What's good, Billy?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Oh man, I'm okay, man.
Great to hear. Great to hear.
Like, how did you get your start in boxing?
I started boxing. My father started me fighting when I was 6 years old, but he passed away when I was 7, so he took me to the gym and I never left.
Okay. Now, when did you transition from a fighter to a trainer?
15.
Wow, that's early.
I was took under the wing of an apprentice teacher at the age of 15 because my eyes are bad. I don't see very well. And the old timer knew that, so they wanted to keep me in the gym to keep me out of trouble. So they taught me how to teach fighting, teach boxing, in all aspects. See, a lot of these guys nowadays are trainers. There's a lot of trainers in gyms. There's very few teachers in schools left in our beloved sport. I was taught from the ground up how to be a teacher. You know, teacher, trainer, strategist, conditioner, corner man, cut man, vet man. And even in the managerial and the business end, they taught us that as well. You got to be well-rounded. You got to be like a general contractor that can do it all and not just a subcontractor where you subcontract out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. What gym did you start with?
I started at the Cambria AC. It was Joe Verns when I started. But initially, it was the Henley's Boys Club. Then it went to the Joe Verns, and then later on it became Cambria AC, and then later on Frank Kubek bought it in '88 and made it the Front Street Gym. It's been a Front Street Gym ever since.
It's kind of like a Philly staple ever since even before, but when they put it in Creed.
It was way before then, though. That's been an active gym since '58.
Yeah, I'm talking about like around the world now. Everybody knows Front Street Gym for Philadelphia.
Motion picture could do that for you. Publicity, right?
Okay. Now, you not only build fighters from the ground up, you also get fighters who are actively pros. What's the difference in the two?
Well, you know, when you train fighters that you didn't build from the ground up, you know what I mean? You got to take what they have and you got to try to improve on it. My mentor, the late, great Mr. Wesley Mozart, my guy, was, in my opinion, the greatest that ever did it. He told me you never change a fighter. You only add to what he's already doing. Because once you change him, you screw him up.
Okay. Do you feel like that's a mistake that a lot of trainers make?
Absolutely. See, you can't change a guy. You can only add to what he's already doing. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like, natural fighters have natural inclinations. Like, for example, say you want the guy to outside slip the jab, but his natural inclination is to catch it. And you force him to outside slip, and he's going to do what you say if he respects what you're doing. But the thing is, you're taking a split second, a minute second, to make him do it. And in boxing, a split second is the difference between life and death. There are two kind of people in boxing, the quick and the dead. You'd be better off having him catch the first one, which he likes to do, and outside slip the second one. You know what I mean? There's a lot of options in boxing. There's many different, because in the grand scheme of things, boxing is nothing more than the questions and answers. Every punch you throw at me is a question. Every counter move I make is an answer. When I can give you more questions, you give me answers, you got problems, and vice versa.
I never heard that. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Questions and answers.
Do you feel like fighters mistake working hard in the gym, or mistake intricate pad work for working hard in the gym?
The pads are the most overused tool in boxing. You know what I mean? If they're used as a teaching tool, that's fine. But a lot of people want to emulate Floyd Mayweather and this, that, and the other. They throw a 50-punch combination, but they never leave the same spot. 90% of the punches are thrown in the same location. Very unrealistic. Everything you do in boxing must revolve around realism, because it goes back to the concept of you train how you fight and you fight how you train. The pads can be used in a very positive manner, and they can be used in a bullshit manner. I'm sorry, I mean to say that. In a not so good manner.
When did pads become like really prevalent?
Let's see. I remember pads coming in the late 80s, early 90s here in the United States.
Yeah, because I've never seen guys like Ali on the pads and Ray Robinson.
Sugar Ray Robinson never had pads. Joe Louis never had no pads. Willie Pep, you know, Sam Langsford, guys like that. Great fighters.
Are you a boxing historian along with a trainer?
Absolutely. You gotta know your predecessors, right?
Mm.
You have to study the past. You have a point of reference. If I tell you about Joe Gans and I never studied Joe Gans, that makes me a hypocrite. So I have to know as much as you can know about the man, right?
Yeah.
You got to practice what you preach. You got to be able to tell these guys, and you got to go and tell them, like when Joe Jeanette fought Sam McVeigh for the colored heavyweight championship of the world in Paris, France in 1909, and the fight lasted 49 rounds, which was 3 hours and 21 minutes. And one got knocked down 17 times, the other one got knocked down 26 times, and the doctor went between rounds and told Sam McVeigh seconds. He said, if your man continues to die, so they stopped the fight. So then when, you explain to them that these guys fought 49 rounds. So when does conditioning cease to be a factor in the world of win takeover? You got to have points of reference, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can check it out. It's on BoxRec. There's fights that's been longer, but I got books that you can't, you can't find it. They're not on BoxRec, but you can go on BoxRec and you can actually BoxRec that one. It'll show up. So that's the one I use. There's been one that's been longer, but that one's easily provable. So I go with that.
What's the biggest difference between fighters of before and fighters now?
Well, fighters before used to fight much more often. I mean, you got a guy like Harry Greb fought 44 times in 1919 alone. Now guys don't have 44 fights in a whole professional career.
Mm-hmm.
The great Sugar Ray Robinson said the key to this thing is activity. The great Ray Arcel had 23 world champions back in time when there was only one world champion in each weight class and only 8 weight classes. There was only 8 world champions in the entire world. And he had 23 of them. So, that's impressive. He said the rest is to rust. You got to stay active in anything, not only boxing. If you're painting houses, if you're a house painter, but you only paint one house a month, you're not going to be or one house a year rather, you're not going to be as proficient as a guy that's painting every day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Makes sense. One of your fighters, Danny Garcia, is facing Errol Spence 2 weeks from now. How's he been looking in camp? I said one of your fighters, Danny Garcia, is facing Errol Spence for the unified championship of the world. How's he looking in camp?
He's looking pretty good. He's looking very good, actually.
Is it rare that a 140-pounder takes his power with him to 147? Because usually you see
it depends on the person. Some people as natural punchers, they carry their power up. Like let's look at a guy at Tommy Hearns. Tommy Hearns was a murderous puncher at 147, right? And he fought all the way up to cruiserweight, and he was able to rock guys at cruiserweight. He was able to carry that power. Now, he wasn't the most devastating puncher at cruiserweight, but he had enough to rock a guy's top. Because at the end of the day, what people don't put into the calculation of punch power is accuracy. That's one of the forgotten elements. That's like if you shoot a guy in the head with a 38, or you shoot him in the head with a 357. Technically, the 357 is more powerful than the 38, but they're both killing. Am I right?
Mm. Yeah.
It's all about placement. You shoot a guy in the chest with a 38, he lives. You shoot him between the eyes with a 32, he dies. It's not about the power all the time. It's about accuracy and placement. The old timers know how to place shots. I don't want to use that vulgar analogy, but it's the only analogy I really understand, that can convey the message that I'm looking for.
Okay. Is it difficult to train a big puncher and try to get him to box, or to train a boxer and try to get him to punch?
Well, you could take a guy and you can make him a better puncher. Not a much better puncher, but if you take a guy and you teach him the proper fundamentals, the mechanics of the punch, you teach him how to, because the punch comes from the ground up, arm only delivers the shot. It's kinetic linking from the ground. It goes from the toes to the end of his fist. Bing. It's a kinetic linking. So you can take a guy and you can teach him proper body mechanics, and you can strengthen him up, and you could work and develop muscle memory, and he'll become a better puncher, but he won't become a great puncher. Great punchers are born, they're not made.
Are there certain things that you can do, like exercises, to maximize your punching power?
The old timers didn't believe in touching weights. If you touch the weight back in the gym, the old timer would walk behind you and slap you in the back of the head till you put that shit down and make it tight and slow. Because they didn't fully understand. But back then, they didn't have the concept of, scientists that we had, the science of the game we have now. Because back then, basically everybody used to read bodybuilder magazines, and curls will shorten the bicep and then make it tight. But nowadays, there's ways that you can strengthen the body. But, being physically strong and being a good puncher doesn't always correlate to being the same thing. I know guys that are frail, real skinny and frail, but they're murderous punchers. I know guys that's strong as hell, but they're not big punchers. They're just physically strong. Mm-hmm. You can take a guy like Alexis Arguello, El Flaco Explosioso, right? He was very skinny, but he was a murderous puncher because he had that long, lanky, frame, and he was able to generate a lot of power and get that snap. Because 90% of power punch is always going to be a snap at the end.
Now, Danny's opponent.
I'm sorry, but to answer your question about making a guy a better, puncher, if you got a guy that's a great puncher, the worst thing for you to do is let him fall in love with that power. Because a puncher is only a puncher because they already do. A boxer puncher could do it all. You want to try to keep that guy have a multi-dimension. Very few single one-dimensional fighters have made it in boxing. Very few. I mean, there are a few, but there's very few guys that were one-dimensional punchers that made it. That one-dimensional fighters that made it in this game. You got to have options. The great Bernard Hopkins said, the better man is the smarter man. It's not the faster, the stronger man, because the smarter man gives himself options. So you got to have options in the ring.
Okay. Danny's opponent, Errol Spence, what skills and abilities does he possess that makes this a difficult fight?
He's fundamentally sound. One of the major difference between a good fighter and a great fighter, the great fighter takes time to master the fundamentals. He's fundamentally sound. He's a southpaw. That usually gives most people problems. He's tall, he's lanky. He's got a good jab. Decent puncher. Good ring IQ. Good fighter. Good all-around fighter. He's well-rounded.
As a trainer, Errol Spence is coming off of, an accident, a long layoff. Is that going to affect the outcome of this fight?
Well, the accident, I'm not sure. I mean, we would assume we're not doctors, so we don't know if, but any form of traumatic injury like that would have to have some kind of adverse effect on your health, don't you think? Because he had to suffer a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. And years ago, in the early 90s, in the amateur program, when we were training fighters, they had a doctor come to us and when we were doing the coaches clinic, and he told us about something called the second impact syndrome, where somebody, they have a TBI and they get banged up real bad. And then 5 years later, they're trying to unclog their sink and they bang their head and they die. Impact syndrome. Now, hopefully that doesn't apply in this situation, but that's what something that we were taught about in the 90s, and, as far as the layoff is always a bad thing. I mean, rest, right? What we talked about earlier, the great Ray Arcel said the rest is the rust. The great Sugar Ray Robinson said, the key to this thing is activity. So it's always going to be a factor. Now, how much of a factor, we don't know.
What is the proper way to fight and beat a southpaw?
There's a lot of different ways. Well, there's a lot of different ways. There's more than one way to skin a cat. You got options now. The conventional thinking is the straight way. You keep your lead foot on the outside of his lead foot. You step around to your left, you fire the right hand, come back with the hook. That's the conventional way of thinking. But there's other ways of beating a guy, If you think about it, the human anatomy dictates the liver's on the right side of the body. You and me have never met a human being whose liver's on the left side of the body. It's always on the right side. So if me and you both orthodox and we're fighting, and I lock my elbow into the side of my body, you could beat the hell out of everything else, but you can't hit that shot until I move my arm, right? Well, southpaw leads with the right side of his body. So every time something comes off that lead side, whether it be a jab, a hook, an uppercut, whatever, he's exposed momentarily the whole right side of his body, which is where the liver resides. One good, well-placed shot there, could be a short night. Not only that, the primary target to the human body in boxing that we use, the two to the body, it's usually the solar plexus, which sits right at the bottom of the sternum, and the liver. Well, if a southpaw leads with his liver, right? As soon as, let's just say for argument's sake, you got your left foot on the outside of his foot, you got your catching middle, so you pick his jab. Boom, as soon as you pick his jab, you shoot a straight right hand to the body, right? And hit him right in the solar plexus. And then you turn a good 45 to the liver, where you turn your punches over underneath, bang, and you really drive that shot. You just hit both of the targets. So in theory, they're vulnerable. Because every southpaw in Graham, I'm expecting the right hand, left hook. If you talk to any honest southpaw, he'll tell you I expect that. They've been expecting that since the day he came to the gym. Because Southpaws fight more right-handed than right-handed fight southpaws. It's just the nature of the beast. There's so much more right-handed than southpaws.
Mm.
In the old days, they used to take everybody who was a southpaw that came in the gym and convert them, turn them around. And I asked the old time, I said, why do you do that? They said, we couldn't get, it was very hard to find southpaws fights at that time. Like guys like De La Hoya, he's a converted southpaw. Miguel Cotto, he's a converted southpaw. So what they did was they would convert them and they would put the power hand out front, so it would be like a power lead. That's why De La Hoya had a very good left hand. That's why Miguel Cotto had a very good left hand.
Don't they do that in Cuba too, right?
Yeah, they turn everybody southpaw in Cuba. Because
the opposite. Okay.
They do the opposite because they feel, that gives them an advantage under the Olympic scoring system. They do it a lot in the Ukraine too. When I was over there, they were telling me.
How long was you in the Ukraine?
Only about a month and a half.
Okay. Can you jab with the southpaw?
Absolutely. If he could jab with you, you could jab with him. Now, if you had the option, you would want to obviously keep your lead foot the outside of his lead foot, keep your catcher's mitt in position, in front of your face, and then you would use the lead hand. You would fence with him. You could catch a jab over top. You could catch a jab for the Russian, which is a hybrid jab hook over top. Bing. You know what I mean? Bop, bop. Why not? You could jab, rock back, jab with him. You could definitely jab with a southpaw.